talking about which, let's bring in our next guests. I am delighted that they are joining me today. This is such an important story. The story of 9/11, no doubt, has impacted us all, changed the way that we live. I mean, not just traveling, but changed our lives in so many respects. I'm sure many of us remember that day. I will never forget it. It's kind of etched in my mind. But let's bring in two people who know far more about it than I do. And I don't have a problem with that. First of all, Norman from 9/11 Revisionist. Thank you, Norman, for joining us today. Very much appreciate you joining us from South Africa. How are you?
I can't complain. Thank you for having me, Sonia. It's very, very nice speaking with you today.
Well, I'm very grateful for you to be here. And Patricia Kazaza, have I pronounced that correctly, Patricia?
Yes, you did fine. Thank you.
Right. Well, I did practice several times. I want you to know that, because I thought that the very least I could do is attempt to get this lady's name right after the sterling, incredible work she's done. I want to show a brief clip from a video to give people a background of you. You are, of course, one of the Jersey girls. You became very famous following 9/11, and not least because, well, you're a widow of 9/11, and you have done far more than most people have. We're going to talk so much today, including about this incredible book from Dr. Judy Wood. And thank you so much, Trev, one of my viewers who sent me that. Very much appreciate it. Fantastic book. And a lot of the conversation today, I think, is going to be revolving around Dr. Judy Wood. So let us, first of all, play this clip to give people a little bit of a background into Patricia and what a powerhouse she is.
These women banded together after their husbands were killed. And now they're leading a campaign to find out exactly how did 9/11 happen.
We are asking you, America, to stand behind us.
An investigation must not interfere with the ongoing efforts to prevent the next attack.
You know, our families didn't want us asking these questions. That was painful. We should, just be grieving and healing. Well, part of our healing process is finding out exactly what happened.
And you're absolutely right. Part of the healing process has to be finding out the truth of what really happened. And you have been absolutely dogged and determined to do this, both of you. Norman, absolute sterling work. And you never give up, Norman. You're extremely passionate about this. Tell us a little why.
Well, it's one of the biggest catalysts for changing the world and putting us basically where we are now. So much has been written, so much has been said about this, but after all these years, nobody's actually been taken into account. There are a lot of people out there claiming to be searching for the truth, but if you really do a little bit of research, you can see that what they are postulating to people isn't really that truthful. And that's one of the things that I've just been trying to have people see, that they can't really always trust anybody and everybody who goes out there and they've got a little soapbox on which they could stand. And then whilst I was writing my articles, then I saw a comment from Patricia, and I reached out to her to ask her whether or not we could have a conversation. We ended up having a very nice, long conversation about the last 24 years, what she's seen, what she's been through, going to DC and all of that. And that then spilled over to an open letter written towards Matthew Campbell in the UK, who's currently pushing the UK courts for a new investigation. And now we're just trying to have people find out more about her open letter.
And that conversation you had was a marathon one. I think it's over 5 hours, if I remember correctly. And really fascinating. Although there were on several occasions, Patricia, I found it incredibly emotional. I'm not quite sure how you managed to cope with a lot of this. And you, obviously, your husband, John, worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of Tower 1, the South Tower. You actually talked to him while this was happening, didn't you?
Yes. He had called me. I was in nursing school, and that Tuesday was a day off for me. And so I'm actually folding laundry, and my husband, John, called me to relay he said, "Do you know what's going on?" He had a very panicked tone in his voice. And I said, "No, what's going on?" He says, "Turn on the television." So I ran and turned on the television, and I was like, "Oh my God." And he goes, at the time he thought perhaps a bomb had gone off in his building. He didn't know it was supposed planes that had hit his building. And the conversation really, it was tough. I mean, I still hear his sobs in my head. That he had told me that they had tried to find an exit that they could manage. I mean, these are all very young people in Cantor Fitzgerald. Most of the people that died that day were particularly young families.
Like 20s and 30s, weren't they?
Yeah, my husband was 38 at the time. So
yeah.
He told me, that the stairwells were ruined. They could not pass them. They tried. The elevators were gone, and the rooftop doors were locked. And the floor was filling up with a thick black. I would have thought it was smoke, but soot like from the explosions that had gone on in the building, and they were having trouble breathing. And he didn't think that they were going to make it. He knew at that time that they were not going to make it. So I was just started trying to comfort him, knowing that, he was a person of great faith. He was a guy who jumped out of bed at 7:00 on a Sunday morning, went to church. And so I went with that, and I said, "John, you're a good man. And if anybody is ready at this moment in time, you are. You're such a good man. Everyone loves you. I love you. John, our son, loves you." And just, and then he just broke down sobbing, and just repeated over and over, "I love you. I love you so much." And we carried on like that for a bit. And then I was going into shock. I could feel it all over my body. And at some point I lost the connection with him. He had called me from his office line. It was early days in the cell phones. And when someone went to the train station to recover his vehicle for me a few days later, that's when his cell phone was on the seat in the car. He had forgotten it that day. So I feel very blessed that I got that phone call. I mean, how often do you find and know for certain how much somebody loves you? They call you on their deathbed. Literally.
Oh, I mean, I feel quite shivery just hearing you talk. The pain that you've endured for a quarter of a century, and to see one whitewash, one cover up after another. You fought for the commission, and even within the commission, there were problems, weren't there? There were spies within the FBI, as one example. What
right.
Did we didn't get the truth from the 9/11 commission?
No, the person that revealed the spies to us, there was Sibel Edmonds. And it was us, the Jersey widows, who brought Sibel to the commission. These were early days in the commission, and we didn't tell them we were bringing her with us. And she relayed to them that there were spies in the FBI. She had joined the FBI after 9/11. To offer her language services. She knew Farsi and the other languages in the Middle East, and was there to help with the backlog of translations that the FBI said that they had. And they were so backlogged, and yet there were individuals in the FBI in that office of translations that were trying to dissuade her from translating quickly, going through the material, trying to get her to avoid certain materials. And they were spies there, she said. And it's just unconscionable that this happened. And moreover, the reaction from the commission, we've talked mainly with Philip Selleck, how he was the executive director of the commission at the time. He was like the gatekeeper, who got interviewed, who didn't, what information they looked at. And basically we were told we could never bring somebody as a whistleblower to them, that they had to go through the proper channels. Well, the thing with the whistleblowers back in the day was they were not being subpoenaed. So without subpoenas, they didn't have whistleblower protections. And therefore, they were not coming forth.
Why would they? Why would they? They would. Terrible. And it's all set up that way, isn't it? This is such
time and time again.
Absolutely. This is such an incredibly powerful open letter that you've written. And before I get to that and like break it down with you, obviously a great deal of it is around Dr. Judy Wood and to do with her theory, because, and Norman, this is what I want to come back to you, if I may, because obviously a lot of people believe that it's controlled demolition or there were explosives or thermite. That's not necessarily your understanding, is it? What do you believe happened?
Well, it doesn't really come down to a belief. Dr. Wood did a forensic investigation of the observable evidence. So when one goes into all the other narratives pertaining to bombs in the building, there could be certain type of such technologies being used. But when you look at the bulk of the evidence and all the anomalies around what happened and what was left of the buildings, you can only come to one conclusion, is that some sort of exotic black ops technology was used to turn those buildings into dust. Even the collapse speed or disintegration of the buildings going faster than gravity, you can't get that done with explosives. Then you have the problem of the 16 survivors in the North Tower between floors 2 and 22, who did not hear any loud explosions going off. They weren't blinded by any bright light. They weren't burned by molten metal raining down upon them, because if you want to sever all the columns in one of the towers, you're going to need at least 29,000 metric tons of thermite. And if you watch any small little experiment with thermite being put off, they use like a small little cup like this, and it makes a huge fire show. So if you've got 29,000 metric tons of thermite in those buildings, you would have seen a second sun when those buildings unraveled, and that didn't happen. And then again, the amount of rubble, that is, you should have at least 12.5% of the original building height of rubble. That gives you around about 14 stories, which did not happen. It wasn't even 3 stories high. So a lot of people have never really looked at the pictures and everything, and that's what's so beautiful with Dr. Wood's book. It's 500 pages. As she explains everything to you, she's got the visual evidence there that you can work through. It's not a difficult book for people to read, but there was a concerted effort ever since she came out with her self-published book, where people attacked her ad hominem and dissuaded people from looking at it because it sounds so sci-fi, which actually, when you just investigate the evidence, it points you to a certain conclusion. And people are afraid of going there because they want to conceptualize everything into something that they can understand. And people should just go look at the evidence or watch Dr. Wood's 2012 Breakthrough Energy presentation that she did. It's 2 hours. And after that, you will have no doubt in the evidence that she presents and the conclusions that she makes from the evidence.
Now, this obviously very interesting, and you touch on a number of issues there. And I think, one, for some people, it seems too far-fetched, doesn't it? Like, some people now have managed to get their head around the idea there was an inside job, that it was a demolition involved. Some people have got that far, but anything else seems to take them too far through the Overton window. But not you, Patricia. You're not having it. And actually, it's really interesting because I think in many respects, it's so powerful that you've been prepared to get behind this. What So let's start working through it, because you start your open letter by saying those seeking to uncover the whole truth about the events of September the 11th, 2001, particularly the destruction of the 7 World Trade Center buildings and the nearby Bankers Trust building, need to prioritize utilizing the most comprehensive examination of the mechanisms involved. That's your intro. Take it away. Tell us more.
I mean, there were, I go back to the personal in this is there were 1,100 people never identified at the World Trade Center who died there. My husband being one of them. There was nothing left of him. He was totally obliterated. It's 1,100 other people. And then there were 400 other people who were only able to be identified by DNA means. And another 200 individuals were basically forced to jump to their certain deaths from 2 110-story buildings en masse. I mean, that has never happened before in fires happening within buildings and that. My thoughts with that were, what was it that they were enduring at that time? What were they witnessing at that time that would have even forced them to do that? And I can only imagine that, you know, if the exotic weapons that Norman and I and Dr. Wood have ascribed to, you know, basically they were being microwaved and then with that dustified during that time. My husband had purchased for his desk these evacu hoods, so that in the event, because he had come to the building after the 93 bombing, which we know was an FBI setup. Apparently the FBI had cajoled a few Muslim Arab individuals into bombing the buildings, but apparently they were supposed to substitute fake bombs. Well, lo and behold, real bombs were used. So I believe 93 was more or less a setup for what happened.
Oh, like a precursor to the
Yes,
event. Yes,
yes.
got you.
So when 9/11 happened, it was like, of course, they came back to finish the job. And that story has been repeated and repeated over these years, but it's only when you look at the evidence that was left behind, or the lack thereof, at Ground Zero and the subsequent cover-up. I mean, they have not even allowed for the toxin material information to be released. It took years for our government to acknowledge that people were getting sick down there from the toxins. They just, within the last few weeks, discovered 64 boxes or 68 boxes that were missing to, you know, establish that there indeed were toxins down there. The cover-up has just been massive. And, you know, to my way of thinking, I mean, it's like 25 years too late, basically, for this information to be getting out there.
And still being blocked, because
Yes.
I don't need to tell you, because you will both be on the receiving end of it. Whenever I cover this from the perspective of Dr. Judy Wood, I get quite a lot of abuse, because people are not, it seems too much for people, the idea of a direct energy weapon or any kind. Yes, go on, Patricia.
No, but we know that they used advanced secret weapons in Venezuela. We had President Trump bragging
Exactly.
about it.
Yes.
I mean, so it's open and notorious now. But when you step back from that and realize that it's been perhaps used on unwitting victims like my husband and 3,000 others, never mind the subsequent wars that came about with millions being killed, more troops died of suicide than actually were killed over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it just goes on, and it's just such an overwhelming crime. It was a crime in and of itself back in the day. And we had to fight for over a year just to get an investigation going on 9/11. You were told we were unpatriotic for even asking for one. I mean, Mayor Giuliani at the time, we met with him, and his comment to us was, an investigation into 9/11 is none of your business.
Extraordinary.
And with that, his handler said, Mayor, I think it's time that we wrap this up, and agreed to disagree, and off he went.
That video, the part of the intro that I played after you said what you say, there is then, and I don't know whether it's you or somebody else, but they're asked what question would they like to ask, and it was, where was Dick Cheney? I'm paraphrasing. Where was Dick Cheney on that day? Was that you, or
that was me?
Why did you say that?
Because I believe that he was largely in control of what happened down there. He was down underneath the White House in the sub basements where they protect those in line to the presidency during an attack or something like that. And basically, he was conducting all the business that transpired that day. President Bush, as we know, was at a grammar school in Florida, reading to some children. And so he was, eventually left that building, which to my way of thinking, even on the day of, was, well, aren't those kids a target then? If this is an attack on America,
right,
why wouldn't you go after the president at a known, function? And he sat there and continued on because he said he didn't want to scare the little kids. And I think you just, at that point in time, pardon yourself and say the president has, bigger things to attend to right now. And
yeah, very weird. It was, the whole response was really weird.
The whole response,
absolutely weird. Norman, the problem is, if after 25 years, we're still no closer to what you see as the actual truth, what hope is there? Because these people are still walking around. They're still existing on Earth, people who potentially know what took place. Is it a case of waiting for them to die before the truth can come out? Or will they do another Kennedy on us? And, you just have to wait and get it in piecemeal many, many decades later. What do you think?
I just think what we need to do is just talk about this more often and keep on pushing. And it's also very strange for me to see how little of the alternative media, talking heads like your Joe Rogans, Tucker Carlson's, all these people, how few of them have actually picked up on Patricia's open letter. It's not like I've not been sharing it in their comment sections and emailing them and all of this kind of stuff, but nobody wants to go there and touch it. And these exotic weapons have been talked about ever since the first recorded black op technology being used was in the Panama invasion of 1989, again with Desert Storm and with the Gulf War. So, and now Trump recently talking about it. We had that MIT professor who got taken out. He was doing research on cold fusion. Another gentleman who was part and parcel of the truth movement was Eugene Malov. He was also an MIT scientist working on cold fusion, and he exposed the cover-up of MIT on the cold fusion research as well. He ended up being beaten to death in front of his house. So it comes down to energy. A lot of people talk about the big pharma, big banks, big everything, but the one thing people don't talk about is big power, because as soon as we can not weaponize this exotic breakthrough energy that Catherine Austin Fitz also spoke about on Tucker Carlson's show, then the whole world will change. And that's what ended up happening on 9/11. It was a demonstration for the people in the know to see what they could do with this type of technology. And to me, it's also infuriating, and I struggle to understand why your so-called 9/11 truth movement would do anything to have you not realize this and not support Dr. Wood and the evidence that she presented and it's been going on since 2007. So A lot of people out there deem themselves truth seekers, but they're only comfortable at a certain point.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that's where we need people to break through, is to not just put themselves in these little boxes and think about everything that's available.
I see that changing, though. I see that the world is opening up to the potential to discuss it in a way that is potentially more appropriate. Let me, Colin Guthrie in the comments says, Sonia, I'm interested to know if Norman and Patricia think the planes were real. There are so many theories about holograms, or were they unmanned and remotely controlled? Any of you care to answer that, or both of you?
I believe that there were planes used that day, but as I say to, the other truth groups is, the transponders supposedly were shut off on some of these planes, and that reflects back to the air traffic controllers where they are in the sky. However, even if those transponders are shut off, the skin of a plane reports back to the air traffic controllers, maybe not as consistently where they are. It may be a flash, along the pathway that says, I'm still here. And apparently through the transmission, the ACARS data that is recorded from the plane to air traffic controller, that the planes that were supposedly used, flight 11, 175, 77, and 93, none of them hit their targets that day. So, maybe what we saw was a holographic hitting the buildings. As we know, these planes are aluminum and they're hitting these steel structures that with concrete and everything else. Normally you see in a plane accident, the plane everywhere, the parts everywhere. Well, I mean, what was found at ground zero, like there was an engine, well, it didn't even match the planes that were supposedly used that day. The NTSB was not even allowed at the site for the longest time and normally the NTSB, just like in Flight 800 that went down over Long Island, they match plane parts. They drug the ocean, underneath the ocean and brought the parts up and rebuilt the plane. We had none of that happening at ground zero. They basically took all the evidence away. At some point in time during the recovery, it didn't continue to be a recovery, and that means recovery of remains as well. They basically scooped everything up, put it in dump trucks, and brought my loved one over to a dump. And that's where they sifted and sorted for remains and parts, and that. It was a removal of a crime scene.
Yes.
When in the history of any crime, and especially one of that magnitude, do you have something like that happening?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, it was insane. And even while it was in recovery mode, they were throwing truckloads and truckloads of dirt over what was there and pouring water on it, supposedly that there were these fires. But yet, we had firefighters and rescue workers walking through. Nobody was being, as we like to say, boiled to death because of all the water that was poured down there. These fires weren't happening. The remains were being diluted, if you will, washed away. I mean, why would you do that?
Right.
In the middle of the largest terrorist, attack that has happened on U.S. soil.
Yeah. Well, there's a problem if you have to question the reaction and the response to the event that took place, which you've been forced to in great detail. Norman, what's your take? Were there planes on the day?
Well, there definitely planes did take off. They never ended up at the crash sites that they supposedly hit. So one can go back to the court case of Dr. Morgan Reynolds. He filed that in 2007 with an affidavit from John Lear. You can find it on his website, nomoregames.net, and I suggest everybody just go read through that, because it makes the case for the impossibility for the planes to fly that low at those speeds and hit those targets. Also, there's more than enough research done by a gentleman with the name of Mark Conlon. He's in the UK. You can go read his Substack 9/11 planes research. He's gone into great depth with FOIA requests and all of that, where it's provable that the NTSB and FBI, they don't have any serial numbers that are linked back to the planes as well. So that was a big cover up. And an important thing is to remember that if there's planes or no planes or whatever, a aluminium can hitting a superstructure like that cannot cause what we saw on 9/11.
I mean,
And
that's
there's a
the
lot of-
very least that people need to accept, isn't it? That is the very least. I mean, it's absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous. Thank you, Norman. Patricia, going back to your letter, you say the lethality of what happened on 9/11 is nothing to trifle with, and settling for partial truths is truly at our peril. That's what we've been dealing with. And you talk about, both of you talk about, you know, people in the kind of 9/11 truther movement. I've interviewed Richard Gage as one example. Obviously, architects for 9/11 given much more airtime than Dr. Judy Wood, it has to be said, obviously. And I know that's not necessarily, I think you've confronted him, or at least you've had some issues, haven't you, Patricia, with what architects for 9/11 have been promoting?
Yeah, because I mean, they're going on, and yet they've said that they have uncovered thermite at ground zero in the dust. Well, there have also been others who have, looked at the dust and not seen thermite in the dust. So, and to my way of thinking is, if this was thermite, I mean, we would have seen it throughout all of the dust, considering, as Norman had said, it would have taken 29,000 metric tons in each building to take those buildings down via thermite. The other thing is, I've seen the injury list, and there aren't injuries of people being blinded by such a demolition. Then there was the firefighter chief battalion, Oreo Palmer. He had made it up into right at the impact zone. And he said, oh, we've got these low level fires, 2 hoses is all, I need to put this out. But with that, almost, instantaneously after he finished that transmission, the building collapsed. I mean, he would be the first to say, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all of these detonation pieces here, wires and whatnot. I see the remains of undetonated things, what would be left behind. He's a fire battalion chief. If anybody would have known that there were not detonations in those buildings, he would have. And if those were his men in the building, he himself was in the building, he would have been the first to say, we've got a real problem here. Everybody needs to get out.
Right. Right. Yeah. Do you know, I have so much respect for what both of you are doing, because it's not easy. You're flying in the face of official narratives, which is never easy. And then you, Patricia, of course, have this incredible emotional attachment to the story as well, quite naturally. So what do you ultimately want from this open letter, Patricia?
Well, part of my impetus for doing that is there's a case over in the UK. This Matt Campbell is bringing it on behalf of his brother, Jeff, who was also killed in my husband's building. It was Tower 1, the first building hit. And he did have remains. I don't have any remains. And, his whole case is based upon what Richard Gage has presented as in the thermite argument. And, there's all this evidence that thermite wasn't used. And I was trying to convey to him to please reconsider the type of evidence that you're using. Look at what Dr. Judy Wood has proposed, because we can't have these weapons being used on unwilling victims. Otherwise we continue that abuse, and it will be perhaps used again. I think they have been used again, as we said, in Venezuela and perhaps other places. And at some point in time, we all become unwitting or unwilling participants as well, if we allow that to continue.
It's like we're complicit.
Yes.
I mean, and that's why I really object. I'm sure, Norman, you can relate to that as well. We can't be complicit in these cover-ups. Norman, what do you say?
No, you've got to expose the limited hangouts. There's enough people who've pointed out some of the shortcomings in the various other counter narratives, and then also the ad hominems thrown at Dr. Wood with this space beams and all of this kind of stuff. She's never mentioned that. And you'll find that 99% of the people who are critical to what she presents have never watched a presentation and have never read her book. And how could somebody want to have an opinion of something that they've never investigated? And that's my problem. If you want to call yourself a truth seeker, you've got to look at everything out there and then make up your own mind, and still be willing to change your mind when presented with more solid, credible evidence. And that is something that's lacking with people calling themselves truth seekers. And I think a lot of people are more conspiracy-tainment consumers than real truth seekers, because they find a narrative that they think is nice and they clamor to that without even thinking about what's being presented to them.
Right, exactly what I was saying when you were waiting to be brought in, when I was talking about the Madeleine McCann situation, is people feel the need to embellish it and create stories when actually the truth is problematic enough. And it's exactly the same when you have these big, huge world narratives, then we need to get it right. So let me just read you this, and then I'd like to finish with you, Patricia, if I may. Mel says, if we give our energy to stories like this instead of distractions, we will get somewhere. And that is the reality, is we are bombarded on the daily. We're divided up. Oh, you think this about this MP and about this politician. We're constantly divided. We never get a chance. And if we're not divided, you've got people saying, well, what about? We never seem to drill down and get to what the real issues are. And I feel that that's what both of you are doing, which is tremendous work. Norman, great respect for what you do. You're always welcome on the show. And Patricia, yourself, of course, I'd like to finish with you, Patricia, simply because it's so personal. What would you like to be a kind of take home message for people?
I always say I'm 64 years old. This is not about me. This is about future generations. And I think the complex and harsh truths of 9/11 need to be revealed, so we don't allow those powers that be to do this in our names going forward in the future. We have to try and stop them from doing this and carrying out these attacks, on other unwitting and unwilling victims. My husband just went to work that day. He was not wearing a uniform in the military. He was not overseas. This happened right in our backyard here in the United States. And we have had the biggest cover up, the least amount of information. I always say if my husband had been killed in a car accident, I'd have more information than what has transpired over the last 25 years. And I said, it's 25 years. It's too late for more excuses. And that's why I always say we need the whole truth. I read a sign on a church lawn at some point in time, and it just epitomized for me what's going on with the 9/11 truth movement. And it's like the sign said, a half truth is still a whole lie, and we just are not getting the truth with these various groups. And that in and of itself is just more of a cover up. These people need to, if they have the intellectual humility and they're honest, they're not trying to continue a cottage industry on the backs of my husband's death,
right.
Then relinquish your role and say, I think that there's something else going on here. We have more evidence. We need to look at it. And I am open to wherever that evidence leads. But that's not what's happening. I'm still hopeful that, they'll have an epiphany and realize, if it could be used on someone like me and my husband, my family got destroyed, it can be used on anyone.
Absolutely, it can. Marco says, these are two incredible guests, such a good conversation. And the thing is each one teach one, right? There may be somebody listening to this today who had never considered what you're talking about right now. And I think eventually, that the truth becomes so overwhelming, lies fall away, whatever the narrative is, lies fall away. And that appears to be happening with this. The stuff that you're talking about would have been for some people and just impossible to consider, even perhaps a year ago. And now I think more people are waking up to that. I want to thank you both for joining us. I know, Patricia, it's some horrendous time in US at the moment. What is it, like 5:45 in the morning or something? Yes. Bless your heart. And Norman, of course, you're in South Africa. I don't know what time it is there. You're pretty aligned with the UK, aren't you, in terms of time?
Yeah, we're basically two hours ahead of you at the moment with your daylight saving time. So it's 1:45 in the afternoon.
I appreciate you both very much for joining us this morning. I think this has been such an illuminating conversation. Everybody, this is Norman, 9/11 revisionist. I think I've already put a link in the description. And if I haven't, I will do at the end of the stream. And Patricia Kazaza, and well, you've heard what Patricia has to say, really kind of heart-touching stuff. And it's time for the truth. If there's ever been a time for the truth, 2026 is it. Take good care of yourself, both of you. I appreciate you greatly for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And very clear, both very, very clear, and painful to have to talk about something like that when you've been through it on such a personal level.
It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.